ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the second Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series of 2019-2020 semester. We are glad you have joined us today, and we are also fortunate to have such a great group of SLPS partners. I want to remind all attendees are in listen-only mode to prevent background noises, but you are invited to ask questions throughout the presentation. Your questions directly into the WebEx chat box. If you are in the live viewing room at UNL Hardin Hall, you can give your questions to the room host, Donna, correct?
Yes.
And they will put them in the chat box. So turn it over to Donna.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the November 6, 2019 presentation. It is on regenerative agriculture, and our speaker today is Graham Christensen. This comes to you as part of the Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series. There are a number of partners in the series. My name is Donna Woodenberg, and I work for the Joslin Institute for Sustainable Communities as Programs and Operations Manager. And Joslin Institute is one of the partners in the Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series group. Another partner is University of Nebraska Lincoln Environmental Studies program. We have the director of the program, Dave Goslin, here in the room, and he has been kind enough to allow us to use one of the classrooms in Hardin Hall on East Campus as our live presentation site, and also Ben Newton and Liang from Central Community College in Grand Island are the ones who are streaming this live for you. So we have three partners working today to get this presentation out to you. Graham has quite an impressive biography, and the research and field practice that he's been doing are also quite impressive. I'm not going to read his biography to you today, however, because I will assume that you read it already, and that's why you're tuning in today. So with no further ado, I will turn this over to Graham.
Thank you, Donna. Greetings, everybody. This is my pleasure to be with you online on this interactive video seminar about regenerating Nebraska. The motto here is growing Nebraska's communities from the soil up. So taking a step back and looking at where we've come from and how we can build a very modern and resilient Nebraska, but all while honoring our culture. So lots changed as I near my 40th birthday coming up this month in November. I've seen a lot change on the farm, and I've seen less young people be around, less creativity, definitely less rural entrepreneurship opportunity come forth. And what I love about this discussion is you can focus on the ecology first, but when you focus all the way down to where everything starts, from that ground level, so much opportunity can grow out of that. And so as we start this presentation, and we're going to work our way there, but the first thing we have to do is take a step back and try to better understand where we come from and where we are now. So recently, there was a petition that has been going around the state as central Nebraska has become a new conversation point from concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. We start to see more folks banding together to call for a ban on new concentrated animal feeding operations. And it's basically asking to stop these until we have regulations or safeguards in place that protect existing Nebraskans. This petition has gotten a lot of attention both from the governor and some other agricultural-based groups, and it's gone as far as to create a reverberance around the state that would accuse the folks behind this petition of not being real Nebraskans. Even we were called radical, out-of-state meat murderers, anti-agriculture, anti-meat groups. But the truth of the matter is that the people that came up with this idea were all local. They were all Nebraskans. They were all real Nebraskans. They're all pro-agriculture, and they were all pro-animal agriculture too. So there's obviously sensitivity in the issues that we're talking about, but this is having to happen now because there's so much push for the vertically integrated system, for the industrial ag system in our communities. It's pitting neighbors against neighbors. And we just know that there's a better way to go forward with this conversation. So I just literally stepped out of the field yesterday. We closed out the harvest a couple days before. We just got everything put to bed on our 152-year-old family farm in northeast Nebraska. And I'm a real Nebraskan. And my goal, which is part of our family tradition, is to be able to keep that fifth generation in a better position, bring it to a better position as we actually hand it off to the next generations of Christensens that we hope someday will have the same mentality as the first 5 generations. So now it's my brother and myself that are starting to fall into the operation, the family farming operation. And this was actually our first harvest where, with my parents always being involved, some capacity, of course, but everything was really done by my brother, myself, and some other friends that helped us. So it's a different time in my life, but we're so proud of where we're going on our farm. I'm going to highlight some of those things as we go through. You can see some of my other background here. I'm definitely a business entrepreneur. Developed solar systems, a lot of focus on farms in rural areas. Also, I'm involved in environmental consulting that has helped, out of one of many collaborators, develop the RegeNErate Nebraska concept. And we have some really cool partnerships with the university and public health in order to try to get more information out to just do that, protect the public's health. This picture is with my grandpa. I was probably about 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old at that stage. So just to point out how real Nebraskan this fellow really is. Here's another picture. This is the homestead on our farm. This house actually burnt down in the 1930s during the Great Depression. But the gentleman you see, you're looking at the screen kind of to your left with the hat on, that's Christian. That's who my name derived from. House was rebuilt here, though, immediately after on this initial homestead, and that's where my brother lives right now. Right across the road where my parents live, and that's where I'll be sliding into when the time is right. Everybody's starting to hear about a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in agriculture. It's hitting everybody right now. Some sectors like dairy have been hit worse than others, but no farm is truly exempt at this time. And in a time where you have an administration that's saying, making statements like, I don't know if there's a place for small and mid-sized farming operations around food production. It's like the big get bigger and the small go home. We have a completely different mentality on what building up our rural communities are. We don't see ourselves as a wasteland, or we don't see ourselves as businesses that are unprofitable. As I look at my other businesses, while they're somewhat different than a farming operation, these kind of numbers, these negative hits for the last 6 years, this could be the 7th. That's not setting up for a successful long-term business. And so, as business people, we need to get back into the mentality of trying to get back in those pluses. One of the programs that GC Resolve has been involved with is in partnership with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Department of Civil Engineering and the University of Nebraska Med Center Department of Agricultural, Occupational, and Environmental Health. What the point here with this program is to be able to disseminate free water quality testing across the eastern region of the state, which is now expanding further out to the west across the state, so that people can start to better understand what is actually going on in their wells. A lot of people in Nebraska still drink out of those residential wells, and they're very unregulated, but also understand what's coming through our waterways. And this is all an attempt to help the public be more knowledgeable so that we can improve the public health of residents in the state of Nebraska. And what we're finding out has been maybe a little bit surprising. We expected impacts, but maybe there may be a little bit more of an impact going on than what we had initially anticipated. So in 2019, about 25% of your above ground water resources, your surface water, and also about a quarter of your well water that was tested by citizen scientists across the region. So about 25% showed that they're over the EPA levels for that has been set by the EPA at 10 parts per million. And when you start hitting those levels, that's when you start to really see a sustained exposure health impacts start to happen. National Cancer Institute actually says that 5 parts per million sustained exposure can lead to all different kinds of cancers. And we have a lot of people in our state that aren't aware that they're consuming this. And as we start to see in rural areas a lot more of these extreme cancer situations, as I've witnessed firsthand back in our area, we're starting to make correlations here. And the beautiful thing is we know that agriculture has a chance to be this great solution and all this kind of stuff. And we want to get to that. But the year before the flooding kind of filtered a bunch of this water out, that spring testing session showed that 42% of our tests were found to have elevated nitrate levels, almost half of our water tests. And so this year, we're going to be running the test again. So it'll be our 3rd year. We continue to collect a lot of data. We continue to get more participation. We're getting a much more holistic sense of what's going on in the eastern Nebraska region. So definitely stay tuned and please, join in and be a citizen scientist with us, because the more samples, the better understanding we're going to have, which means the more good that can be done to help more people have that high quality of life that we strive for our friends, family, and neighbors. Here's just a little picture of some of the tests that came out in the spring of 2019. Summer results will be being released pretty soon. And you can see that there's a lot of red and orange in that area. Those are the hot spots, especially the red. So what we're finding out is no area is immune. And in 2018, of course, in my home county, which is Burke County, had an extra push there, collected quite a bit of samples there, more samples than any other county, and we were averaging 12.8 parts per million, so well over that 10 parts per million in my home county. And the well at our farm was at 20 parts per million, and the water running through the stream was about at 20 parts per million nitrates too. So we're an area that's really being impacted. It's really hitting close to home. And of course, I want to live the rest of my life back at this farm in this location, as I know a lot of other young people do, too. So how are we going to resolve this? How are we going to get at this? This is a picture from the spring of 2017. This is Lenoma Beach. Most folks know where that is, but it's between Omaha, or between Gretna and Ashland. And it's right off the Platte River. Platte River, of course, just if you were to keep looking straight to the west, there past that lighthouse, that's really close to where the wellheads for the city of Lincoln are. What this standing body of water does, that sits right next to it, displays how heavy some of the nutrient runoff is in this area. These are blue-green toxic algae blooms, usually caused from excessive nutrient runoff. Also have, and as many people do, growing concerns about the exposure to glyphosate from Roundup, chemical used to spray weeds. Farmers have been using it a lot on genetically modified corn and soy, and we've weed killer just for people at schools or people cleaning up villages, created in the United States. And you can see as genetically modified started becoming more of the norm in the early 1990s, how much the exposure has increased to 2014, closer to that present time. And of course, while levels are very high in United States residences, this has become global. They're starting to become high, and people all over. But because we've had more exposure, it seems like in the United States, the trends are that they're way higher than anywhere else. And I have a slide on that in a second. But as I started hearing some really smart folks talk about this, one of the slides that blew me away was the chemicals in pregnant women. And you can see the green bar there shows glyphosate. And these are actually the percentages of women impacted, and the levels of the glyphosate is being found in about 96%, somewhere right around there, of pregnant women. And there's correlations to from extended glyphosate exposure to less gestation time in the womb for the developing baby, as well as lower IQ levels. And I do know there's some questions about IQ tests out there, but nevertheless, even if you did not have access to some of the same educational resources as other people have had in the past, still lowering IQ tests is probably not a good trend in the wrong direction. And so glyphosate is becoming more prevalently a part of our life. We also found out from this same doctor that in the tests they have done on rats, of course these tests have not been done on humans, that the initial exposed rat that was exposed with the glyphosate, 4 generations of baby rats down were having birth defects. This was not the case with the rats that were not saturated by glyphosate. And of course, that correlation is now playing out in the court systems, where you see that there's a lot of there's over 1,000 people now lined up suing Monsanto, and the first several cases that come up were ruled against Monsanto in cases of cancer situations, primarily lymphoma. That's the one that folks are talking about. And there's even an attorney in Nebraska who recently took up a case to the courts. I'm not quite sure where it is, but I know it's happening pretty much in the present time. And he brought the first farmer cases in the United States to this discussion. So this hits home, right here, most certainly, and is an impact of the way that we've been practicing agriculture in the state of Nebraska. The left side that you're seeing up on the screen right now is my results from my urine samples from when I took a test to find out if I had glyphosate in my body. Now, glyphosate can move through your system really quick, so these are correlations, but these correlations I'm about to tell you about, they mimic the findings of larger numbers of people that have been taking the test. And because I've had this experience of seeing like so much of the stuff in the background, so much of what farmers are doing, and I've seen policy loosened up to allow more of these kind of programs to play out, I practice know your farmer as much as I can. That's what I try. I want to consume from people that I know and I trust, and there's good people out there all around here that can help you meet your dietary needs if that becomes a preference for you. When I can't get something directly from a farmer I know, then I try to supplement with organic, and I don't think the organic level is perfect. I wouldn't claim that that is 100%, but what I would say is that my urine samples and the amount of glyphosate in my urine were lower than anyone else in my family was. And of course, I practice that, because I feel like I've learned a lot. And it's redirected the way that I go about my diet. You can see another one of my family members on the right side was much higher than I was, this family member right here on the right side was somewhere in the middle. So like this is probably about half of what the 2 people in our family, that probably had worse diets, actually look like. So this correlation once again matches out. You can see the North American average on the bottom being way out there. This is like people in cities and everywhere. We didn't take these when we were spraying. It wasn't correlated to like direct spray. This is dietary, is what we're talking about here. And the European average, of course, being much level, as they've been a little bit more cautious about moving forward. So while I'm definitely not here to advocate that all genetically modified is bad, I'm thinking it's time to start calling some things into question. Because a lot of stuff is happening, getting through. The regulations are lax, and while genetically modified is being regulated, and then there is a process, it's still allowed some of these chemicals to get through that are now having broad impacts on us. And And what further worries me is new forms of genetic modification like gene editing, or gene drives, where you actually bring species out into the world to attack other species that are appeared to be harmful. These are very unregulated right now. And when you start doing gene editing in food, you can't tell that it's been gene edited. You skip part of the evolutionary process is what happens, but you aren't able to actually test and know the difference. This is unregulated because of that and because of some other reasons, I'm sure. And we probably need to take a step back, because what I'm seeing in my neighborhood is cancer and Parkinson's on the rise. Farmers that have been exposed for a long time becoming more susceptible. A lot more of this stuff is happening than when I was younger and then in my parents' generation. For sure, I'm seeing yields on our crops that have plateaued under genetically modified. They don't continue to go up, so therefore that calls into question the feed the world, a motto that you keep hearing over and over again. And you start to really, and then you have a bunch of farmers that are really struggling just to keep their multi-generational farm in place. It doesn't seem to me that the current system is really working very well at all. And so we need to take it back to the beginning and make sure, I think part of it is that we're putting out products that are tested, that are tried and true, and we're very sure aren't going to impact the public's health. Because genetically modified, once again, and corn only really hit this area in the early 1990s. And so we're still really kind of the guinea pigs. And while there isn't scientific evidence to show that the actually genetically modified kernel is, when you're changing the DNA of the kernel and implementing a pesticide that's harmful to a bug that eats it, but then you feed that to cattle, it get passed down into the human consumption or food chain. What does that mean? What does that mean for us? What does it mean for all these crops that have absorbed some of these harmful chemicals and then are passed through the food chain? Well, I'm starting to think we're starting to find out, and while there's a lot of correlations starting to pop up, maybe there isn't enough direct evidence, and I hope some folks are watching out here that can continue to devote their lives to this, because we have to raise these questions. That's our moral duty, and it's very important that we maybe take a step back and understand that usually what humans get into when we try to tamper with the natural evolutionary process, we set into motion a whole new set of things that we haven't thought through, because we're not good people, we're not good future readers. You know, most of us don't have the skills of Nostradamus. Unfortunately, we just don't. And so maybe we should take a step back and try to ensure that we're taking care of the public's health. And that feed the world mentality, I just want to point out, if you really want to feed the world, look at one field that's all one crop as far as you can see, across the plains, across the land. Doesn't it seem like you'd be raising more food if that crop also had a set of perennials that were layered a little bit higher, and another set of trees that were producing fruit that were layered a little bit higher, and you had some livestock running through the system, and now you're producing food for consumption at all these different levels on the same acre. You still have corn, probably rotate in beans, but wouldn't it seem like feeding the world would actually be growing more food per acre in more different ways than just one monocrop in which the yields have plateaued and stopped going up? We do have growing populations in this world, so we have to be more creative about how we go about this. But all I'm saying is what we're doing is truly not really meeting the needs of the growing populations, and a lot of people just aren't getting fed, period. Now, the Great Flood of 2019, here's a shot from the Missouri River on some folks south of here just a little bit. Devastation, scary. And at a time when we're starting to deal with more extreme climatic events, I just don't question what some of the planners and zoners are doing. We have to be more savvy and thoughtful about the future and open to what's truly going on here. So this is on the left is the new Costco Lincoln Premium Poultry Processing Facility, and you can see that during the floods, it became an island. There would be no trucks in and out. If this thing would have been operational, what would have happened to those birds? it looks like a public health disaster to me. This is the same area in which the CDC put out an alert that to not go in the water because there's already harmful pathogens being released in that area from the sewer backing up, as well as I suspect probably also some issues with Hormel in their sewer system too. So continuing to put more of these things in floodplain type areas is a bad idea. It's a really bad idea to develop these things in floodplains and think you can just lift it up a little bit and everything's going to be cool. On the right side are a set of the barns that were developed too close to the Missouri River. That's near Herman. You want to look at why people are upset, like look at what's happening around our cities, just upstream from Lincoln and Omaha. Each one of these dots represents 4 to 32 barns in one place, each barn containing 47,500 birds. This is Costco's new barn locations, and I'm missing a couple because there's a few more that have been approved since then. And so that's why there's been some folks in the public health field that have, you know, just kind of raised alarm about what happens to the litter from 21 million chickens, all new to our culture. You know, what are we going to do with that litter? We spread that litter. We have extreme climatic rainfall events. What happens to the litter after spread? Then it washes downstream. And the people that apply the litter, there's not really public knowledge on like what happens once they purchase the litter. So once again, we're not truly considering the health aspect when we're setting up these things. We're just considering profit motive. And there has to be a balance because if you have health impacts, people's profits are going to be impacted down the road. And so we're not taking into account the bigger picture. And I just hope this is not the future of our state, Nebraska. But that's why there's been proposed regs to protect existing Nebraskans. Furthermore, public health disasters. This is the spot in the pink/purple where the lagoons would be that would house the waste and the different components that are considered waste of the birds from the processing plant. This is half underwater. So I mean, we are smarter than this. And then, of course, I already talked about the statement from the U.S. Agricultural Secretary. But this gained us a lot of attention here, and it's given us a lot of opportunity to redirect the conversation. And this is what I love, and this is what the hope, and this is so optimistic because we have a way that meets our culture. And you can see this young farmer right here near Fremont, Nebraska, is looking at land that he lost in the Great Flood, but he already has his rye coming up, roots in the ground to solidify that soil structure and to soak in those nutrients so they don't all run off into the ground. And that's just a little closer snapshot right here. The small communities are dissipating. They're struggling. They're going away. The case of Emerson is that they recently lost a grocery store. So they've had to take a step back. And while these conversations, you know, aren't always perfect, they're tough conversations to have. But what are you going to do when, because of the floods, you can't get to Sioux City? It takes an hour to get there. You have an elderly population. And the only place really to eat now has become, you know, some bar food in town or go to Pender and get Subway. That is not a healthy diet, and people deserve better than that here. So the Village of Emerson is having some of these hard conversations right now on how they can be a part of the solution, how they can protect their community. And it's not going to be easy for them. But this is the snapshot of the era that we're entering into across the state of Nebraska. Villages, Emerson is just one of many. But the solution lies in the soil. It truly does. And we have the chance to reduce greenhouse gases, several different kinds, not just CO2. We have better water holding capacity. We become more drought resilient. We also filter the water. We have cleaner water for better agriculture, and we have healthier soils. As we have healthy soils, we have more nutritious food, and the farmers benefit too because these measures help reduce input expenses, and they move the farmer into all kinds of new value-added areas. And then there's carbon markets being discussed at this time as well. It's so exciting to be in Nebraska right now. What does regenerative farming look like on this part of the state? Regenerative farming practices include no to minimal tillage. So we don't want that deep plowboard tilling as much as humanly possible. Yeah, you might have to go and till up like a little ditch this form to recompact that, or till in small areas of compaction, but for the most part, eliminate it so that we can continue to put plants on there that sink this carbon out of the sky and we hold it there over time. And we'll keep pumping the ground as a natural carbon sequestration mechanism. Then you add, the second step is you add diverse cover crops in between your cropping rotations. you start understanding how that works, which loosens up your operation a bit and allows you to start adding more diversity in your crop rotations. Additional crops now come into play. And then the thing that really takes up your organic matter levels, really starts giving you the full benefits and starts to save farmers a lot of money, is when they take livestock and run it through the system quickly. And that fertilizes naturally, which does cut down those input expenses. It gives the farmer another market opportunity on his already existing farm. So very logical, common sense things that we're talking about in these regenerative principles. And then you know, get a little bit more sophisticated, start holding in that soil, stopping that erosion with trees and micro orchards. And we produce more food off of that. And we need to start a serious marketplace conversation on how to stimulate that here in Nebraska, because we have an abundance of opportunity. You can also see, like the picture on the right, this is a restored prairie area just north of Lincoln, near Raymond, Nebraska. They're practicing silvopasture, giving habitat for the animals, pumping more carbon and holding that soil into place. So in an era of climate extremes, this is going to be a very resilient farming operation. And the ultimate goal is in-farm fertility. Get the fertilization to start happening naturally so the farmer can cut down his input expenses. We experience less of the runoff situations in this new era of climatic extremes. A great case study, you have a farmer just outside of town here, went from 7,000 to 700 acres, took his land out of the feedlot, took some land, pastured it back, added in cover crops and small grains, started flipping the livestock through the whole system, and in a decade raised his organic matter levels from 2.6 to 6.9%. He didn't spend one dime on synthetic nutrients over that time, saving a bunch of money, became 70% more profitable than what he was per acre initially, and he's feeling a lot better about his life. He's also been able to bring in additional employees onto his land to help in all these different areas. So here's a view of some of his pasture that he's returned back to native, and you can see his cattle running through that system at Pleasantdale. The silvopasture project is just north of town. It neighbors another ranch, and that is practicing these techniques as well. And you can see the cattle going through their operation. They have a really slick, simple after they have set up, little work to set these things up. But get up in the morning, open a gate, take them to the next pasture. And 2 days later, you're out there, you open up the gate, take them to the next pasture, and they continue to run around that field, fertilize. He increases his native grass production, which means more feed for his cattle. It also means that more carbon is getting, CO2 is getting breathed out of the air, and more carbon being stored in the ground. Randy Rupert Farm in Nickerson is a conservation farm. Cattle runs through this operation too. And then, even here in Aurora, Nebraska, with, I would say, typically a little bit less fertile soil than this part of the country, by using these systems, we're seeing farmers be able to still yield. Maybe they don't plant corn every year, every other year, but it's a definite consistent part of their rotation. And they're raising 220 bushel corn. And by the way, this farm's been organic since the 1950s and practices many of these regenerative techniques. Lots of case studies right here already, which is super exciting. Then you got rookies like me trying to figure this stuff out because we know it's right, really not having a clue what we're doing. I take my advice from the dog. But we're starting to even do this stuff too and try to, firm up that soil and give that resiliency back to our land on some highly erodible side slopes. Increase organic matter and put ourselves into a situation where we can be able to run the livestock through and add those variation layers of trees. And we're planning on this spring planting an acre of hazelnuts, which we hope to press into oil in about 6 years when they get established. So always thinking ahead and just doing little things that we can do and all agree on in our family, even though change can be scary for the various generations that have these discussions on our kitchen table. We shouldn't neglect the rest of the state in areas that are just maybe native rangeland. This is a picture of the sand hills. You see there's sand areas. You see there's blowouts going on. By starting to really hone down on how the grazing systems are being implemented, there's a lot of people doing really good grazing work out in the sand hills. So not to take anything away from some of our studs out there, but there's a great opportunity to restore degraded rangeland that people have said hasn't been stored. And we're seeing case studies like that in Chihuahua, Mexico. Just look at the side-by-side comparison from a desertified area to somewhere where they've been starting to re-implement biodiversity with good livestock grazing. These are about 3 miles apart, but the one system holistically grazed and the other one was continued graze, and way less cattle in that system now, and there's definitely not a lot of sequestration. That rancher is at a disadvantage because he's not producing enough food for his cattle and he's got smaller herds. And this is a bad picture. I'm going to fix this one of these days, but there's been some really cool stuff that's happened in China. in Kenya, in New Mexico, and some other areas along this opportunity. And so what an amazing opportunity for our friends in central Nebraska and out west that are ranching. So a bunch of people came together, networks came together, and we introduced the Regeneration Proclamation. Get your Regeneration Proclamation. The second edition came out. It's a guide on how to access people that meet your ethical dietary standards or your ethical food production standards. We have started to map this out. We want more people to support those kind of businesses out there as we start to regenerate the whole state of Nebraska. It also shows our vision for the future agriculture. Very livestock centric, just proper livestock handling. So we're really excited about what the future holds. And we're also looking at the carbon market development conversation or carbon payments for farmers and ranchers that are using these practices that are scientifically proven to reduce greenhouse gases. So I've done some work on this in the past. This conversation is starting to come about in a serious fashion again. And I'm really excited for 2020 because if we don't fight like every little, federal policy conversation that comes up in our state, Nebraska is going to be one of the great beneficiaries of this. Back a decade ago when we crunched the numbers, we figured that carbon storage could potentially yield enough economic revenue to become the third largest grossing commodity in the state of Nebraska. So this is the kind of potential we're talking about with the $10 to $15 carbon market. But there's going to be a lot of ways to go about this. This is just one of them. But it's time to get Nebraska in the forefront of this conversation because this is how we're going to save farms, and this is how farmers and ranchers are going to be part of the solution. Again, we're starting to introduce a new label. This Costco chicken stuff, kind of like turned a lot of people off, and so we're looking at how we can introduce regenerative chicken production in the state of Nebraska. We have 3 different communities that have started to grow interest in this model that does let the birds out during those warm months. They shut down, they don't have flocks during the coldest months here, and using multi-layer stratosphere of different kinds of products that can be sold for profit or some of it going back into the food system. This is a ground level view in Northfield, Minnesota of one of these farms. It's a cluster up there. Here's another view of these systems up here. And then here's a view of one of these systems that is just developed in Pine Ridge on the reservation in a super arid desert. And look at like this jungle atmosphere they've recreated for these happy birds. Here's another look at that, powered by solar, of course, because it's 2020 now and we're moving into a new future where this stuff is the norm. And the Regenerative Ag Alliance is the group that's consulting here to help start to set up some of these opportunities down the road. Part of regenerative farming, part of regenerating Nebraska is also harnessing our valuable natural resource potential. This is just a business project. This powers a business that's on a farm. This is real entrepreneurship. This lady is doing some really cool stuff with the nursery on a farm near Bradshaw. But it just shows you all the people that get involved. Like just one little project on one little place starts to spur more economy at the ground level, and we need it. And lithium-ion batteries are now a thing. This is a young farmer, a small farmer, practicing regenerative that we installed that one on the right. You can see it's just that little square box at the bottom under his electrical system. And I'm just saying everybody that's hitting us up about solar development now is asking about the most modern lithium products that they can put out. And a little expensive yet, but this year, like we're doubling the amount we put out last year. And it's trending, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. And Nebraskans like independence, like security. This offers all those things. Really cool times. Here's a camp. This is a fun one we just did this summer. The battery system that you see there that goes with those the smaller array on the left-hand side, that actually will back up the water pump. So near Fremont, Platte River floods, and something is washed away that create electricity. They're still going to get water for the kids. So it's kind of a small project, but definitely got interest from the utility OPPD. They're coming out to do a visit on this, and yeah, just showing you more of the opportunities that are coming about through renewable energies. On that right solar is on the same camp, and it helps power a good chunk of about 5 cabins that the kids stay in. And then we know about wind energy potential here. Nebraska is a real windy state, but we don't have a very high threshold of it yet in the state, although some utilities are moving closer to that. The one I want to point out here is that we have all these high land tax or property tax situations here. But what we're able to do with wind energy and big solar projects is bring in a whole bunch of new local tax payments. $8.5 million have been driven into rural areas to fund schools and local and county services, which is super awesome because we need them. And that's the way we can get at some of these things, creating new tax revenues without having to wait for the legislature to push this one through the finish line, which has been very challenging, as anyone who's watched this debate can do. But I love the water savings and I love the metric tons of carbon being saved. And that's what it's all about. That's what really drives this younger generation, I think, as well as myself. And then to leave you with some focuses as we move forward, some priorities on how we can make our state a very regenerative, resilient state, and maybe a powerhouse in the solution to rising greenhouse gas emissions, and including and teaming that up with just a robust rural and urban economies that support this. Here's a little roadmap of some focuses that I think, if we formalize as a state, would change things for the best and create a model that not only other states but other countries would be sure to try to implement in their own respective way, in their own respective climate, with their own respective soil types. So here it looks like buffers on all waterways. We got to stop that soil from just running off. The NRCS of the USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, says that we lose 3 tons of soil per acre per year. That's a lot of soil. Can you believe that? 1 acre? That's the average in Nebraska on farmland. That's how much is running off. That means we're not going to be able to grow as productive of crops. So we need to keep that soil in place and build that soil up over the years. And so the first thing is, let's just stop it from running off into our waterways. Yeah, that's the easy one. There's discussions going on about that right now. Education to farmers to expand cover cropping on all row crop acres. So all these row crop acres in the eastern half of Nebraska, there should be implementation of the cover cropping. And as far as the folks that are running row crop systems in the other part of the state too. We need to be able to integrate that cover cropping system. And I don't know, this is something the farmers just need help to understand and do this in a way that's not risky. There's consultants out here, farmers, that will help you do this. We've started to talk to folks and just do the educational process here, so we can transition to increasing soil organic matter levels statewide. We need to get more livestock run through these systems. In my county, it's really rare to see a livestock operation anymore. Most farmers don't have them. And then you go to Cumming County and all the cattle are over there in the neighboring county. It's like, come on, spread it out. Every farmer has a role in this. It can help your bottom line. It can get you into differentiated and better markets. It serves as your fertilizer too. This would help your system and help you cut down on those input expenses and give you more opportunities to make more money. So as farming businesses, this seems like a no-brainer. But how can we be able to do that? That's the key. We definitely need emphasis on that. And for folks in other areas, in the rangeland areas, looking at these managed grazing programs and trying to clamp down on how we can increase that native grass production so they can have even more profitability in their business. I know there's a lot of interest out there from our efforts 10 years ago to do some of this, and there's some good models in our state on that too. And integrating livestock or silvopasture into grazing rotations on that rangeland, that will help sink carbon. There's a value for that. The carbon market's going to help drive more of these kind of things. And implementation of a statewide shelter belt program to rebuild those shelter belts and make sure that our land doesn't start blowing away as it did in the 1930s when we had kind of gone down the same path. We're not quite there yet, but we're flirting with it, and we don't need to re-experience something that was catastrophic to this area and states to the south of us through the plains. And then it's the exploration and expansion of the marketplace for agroforestry, so that we have more tools and tool shed, and this stuff gets really cool, but all of a sudden we're becoming a completely resilient state, and where that soil is like money and we're holding it in there, but it's also a habitat for all these ecosystems, which means better opportunities for pollinators to continue to do their job, and all the other wildlife that have diminished in our area. Pheasants would be an example, but also for the most humane treatment of our livestock. Trees serve as really good cover. And then expansion of on-farm renewable energies is a no-brainer as we start to put these things together. I definitely stand in with the students that have started to demand a state climate action plan to transition to regenerative, harnessing our renewable energy and saying no to Keystone XL. I feel grateful for the energy that's coming from the young people here. It's their turn, it's their future, and this is really refreshing to see and gives me a lot of hope that we are on that cusp where great change for the better of our state and of our country is about to happen. And I can continue to see the rising commitment on that, and that is really an amazing story in itself. With that, I hope everyone that was able to tune in better understands kind of the regenerative vision that is out there, that is starting to become a commonplace talking place from all kinds of farmers and from people all over the country. But I just do want you to know that as far as these conversations go, Nebraska has become a focal point, has become a center area, a crossroads for this conversation. With a large amount of cooperation and support of each other, this will be our future in Nebraska. And my oh my, what a place that would be to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. That was really interesting and informative. I enjoyed it immensely. Are there any questions from the room here?
So how did we initially move to an unsustainable and monocultural society?
I think there was layers that were involved. Some of this can be traced to the development of big war machinery through the world wars, and looking at how some of that machinery could be implemented in different industries, agriculture being one of them. As some of these things started to develop, you started to see a philosophy in agriculture really took hold in the 70s, but had roots earlier than that, on looking at how to utilize machinery, technology, different kind of ways to basically replace the human component of agriculture. Then as we got into the 80s and 90s, you started seeing the introduction of the genetically modified, which, I think there was a lot of good reasons people were trying to get into that, but maybe it was rushed into a little bit, as is the point that I'm pointing out. But that enhanced it, and that took it to a new level. And basically, you've seen less need for people to care over the land. Now, I understand the need for technology and the simplification of things, and I understand precision, as well, in many different ways. But there's more and more people, and more people need jobs, and it seems like agriculture is an area where more care of the land, and when we can be able to develop these industries right around there in the processing sector and the distribution with bees, with livestock, with trees, all these different areas can join into that. It just seems like technology is great, and it will be a part of the data and our understanding moving forward as we do these systems. But we've gone completely away from our connection to the land in this time, and it was a long transgression with some viewpoints that really took strong hold in the 1960s and really started to play out in the 1970s, especially in poultry, where they first vertically integrated, cut the profits of several different sectors and kind of monopolized them or vertically integrated them, so they're all under the control. This is all about efficiencies. It's supposed to be feeding the world, but it's having catastrophic consequences. We need to go the other way now.
Thank you. Ben and Liang, do you have any questions that were submitted during the talk?
Yes, we have quite a few. We'll start with the first one. Graham, can you discuss your experience with plant pathogens and insects becoming resistant to pesticides?
With plant pathogens becoming resistant. Okay, so one thing I'm seeing right now would be the prevalence of, now slipping my name, but there's a weed that's really prevalent in Nebraska that has started to take over a lot of the soybean fields that is no longer being successfully eradicated. Polyamaranth, there you go, by traditional chemical applications. It's basically that issue is going on from this side or from this part of the country, at least to the eastern shoreboard in North Carolina, from what I found out when I recently visited with them. The other concern, I guess, that I am also looking at with pathogen resistance, maybe not plants in general, would be that our waterways seem to be teeming with more antibiotic resistant forms, superbugs, if you will. We just have run recent tests in northeast Nebraska at 7 different locations. And we're looking for 6 different pathogens that fit in those areas: E. coli, salmonella, fecal strep. There's a few more, not right on the top of my head. And it seems like there is a heavy buildup. These are usually correlated with animal agriculture or human waste as well. And these are in very rural areas where there's not a lot of human waste being disposed into these area waterways. So we're starting to be more concerned about that. And of course, in the beginning, I talked about the Costco plant who would use antibiotics on at least the chicks, or in time of need, I think is kind of the times that they're saying. We're going to try to also, I will just let you know, better understand how that plays out in our waterways at this time too.
Okay, thank you. This is a 2-part question on cover crops. How does moving to cover crops and crop rotation affect labor, machinery, costs, and capabilities? And then the second part of that question is what kinds
What I like, there's a number of ways to go about cover cropping. And as we've been experimenting on our farm, in northeast Nebraska, we're in an area that doesn't have quite as long as a growing season, obviously, as you do when you start to go further south. So coming in and planting right after soybeans, yeah, you might get a good stand of something, say it's not a perennial, but not enough to actually make the crop harvestable. It's just all about soil health benefits, and it's tougher for business people to be able to draw out the positive lines. But perennials are definitely provide a really great opportunity. So one everybody talks about who shouldn't be overused because it does use a lot of moisture would be rye, which goes dormant and then comes back up as a perennial in the spring. But it's different crops for different needs. You can use oats, you can use wheat, you can use sunflowers. Some people use turnips to deal with compaction. It's really what we're finding out is the more diversity you can add to your application, as long as you can manage it by trying to harvest it or utilize it for livestock feeding, the more diversity, it seems like the better for the soil health benefits is what we're learning to understand. And so now back to the initial part, it's going to take a little time and labor, but of course you're eliminating your disking session as well. So you kind of swap out some of that tillage for some of the implementation of the cover crops. And in the case of Delphi and they're in Pleasantdale, in order to seed that and not wanting to go broke and just, he was looking for the easiest ways to apply these crops. He basically took his best hay and, of course, no thistles or some of the bad stuff that people really want to avoid in their pastures, and just ran that over some land that had currently been tillage row crop, and return that area to pasture, with that prime hay land. And so that was virtually no cost. It's just a little bit of cost of labor. You don't necessarily need extra bodies on the cover cropping, maybe a little bit, depending on the size of the operation that happens. And a bag of rye or a bag of oats is about 15 bucks per bag. So like some of these things are not really super expensive. And if you are able to firmly utilize them, I think that's where the best bang comes for the buck. Is there anything else to that I did kind of hit?
So then we'll move on to the next question. Would moving to a regenerative type of farm require less acreage to produce revenues?
I think this is my opinion, but I believe that if there's more people properly managing, smaller acreage areas of land instead of this, 15,000 for one farmer, which doesn't even leave time, like in an operation that's that intense. If we saw more people returning to the land, they could become more profitable on way less acres, and of course have a massive impact. And so there's a policy piece that to me goes with the stimulation of carbon markets. I would like to see a generational transition happen, and I would actually like to see there be programs that created these partnerships with the boomers and the younger generations, so that the boomers would basically be paid to something to bring young people on, and then the education piece for advocating for these soil health principles would be teamed up for the new farmers that went with a chance of ownership and transition of ownership at some point when that became appropriate. Because right now we can't even get onto the land, and so even the discussion of your question is very tough to be feasible until we develop a conduit to get young, energetic people back onto the land to implement, all these very simple but still different than what the mold has been for the last 30, 40 years here. Type of practices. But yeah, more profitability, less acres required. I think more care for the land is definitely a thing. But you cut out more of the chemical expenses also as you continually to implement the biodiversity, and some of those funds are also going to be transitioned for the cost of the seed and the cost of another hand or two on the labor side of things.
Okay, thank you, Graham. And then we have quite a long question here, so I'll break it up into parts. So the production that comes from operations such as the ones you described bring a premium price, which helps the producer. But what about the average consumer?
Well, it's truth that for the average consumer, you just let this old system the same way it was, that they could have a price impact. And so what we need to focus on is eliminating the price impact for the average consumer, so more of the average and even low-income consumers now can have access to that kind of a product. And we could get into reformation of the Farm Bill to support various food crops and, of course, soil health practices and probably transitional programs like that. And I hope everybody on this webinar does just that, is get involved with that process and starts pushing those into place, because that should be a part of this. But we can already work with existing farmers that have become more structured and organized right here in this kind of metro area of Omaha, Lincoln. There's 50 farmers right around this area that have banded together under Lone Tree Foods, so that they could be able to hire somebody to help connect them with markets, to help coordinate the transportation and bulk deliver stuff to these two metro areas, our population centers, so that there's less trips back and forth, and that shipping process, that transportation becomes less of a cost. And then they have partners that redistribute that. We've seen interesting and creative connections being made in this process already, and where there has been some of those drop points that are food hubs essentially, that have also teamed up with appropriate organizational partners that can furthermore access the SNAP benefits, which are part of the Farm Bill as well, to alleviate some of those price differences too. meaning that now if you're doing bulk deliveries, and for some situations, if you're adding that benefit there, you can be able to access really, well, the highest quality products, I think, of anywhere in the world for a reasonable price. So we're there, but if we want to see this be expedited in a more aggressive fashion, which I think would be a good thing, we need to have a serious discussion about the farm bill and talk about those components that I addressed earlier. But just will let you know there's 8 or so drop points here in Lincoln and an equal amount in Omaha. So accessibility of good product that are using these principles is already here, and it's reasonable. And if you have some folks that work in low-income communities or represent those groups or people that are just real good leaders in there, there's creative ways that have already been started in Nebraska to be able to further alleviate this process. Prices, I mean.
Thank you, Graham. It is 1 o'clock, so I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. We do have a few more questions that I may send to you via email or through your email that you have here listed on the screen. But I do want to end the presentation, so I want to thank you, Graham. That's at the intersection between policy, science, and agriculture. And our next presentation will be on December 4th. It's a Wednesday as well at noon. And Metro Community College will be the host, and Crystal Chisel will present on Project Drawdown. It's a global research organization that identifies viable global solutions for climate change throughout the world. Again, let's thank Graham, and a great presentation.
Pleasure, and I look forward to trying to answer a few more of those questions that may come through the email. Thanks, everybody.
And remember that this SLPS presentation was recorded and it will be available on YouTube in about 1 or 2 weeks.
It's something that you'd be aware of. In
Thank you.
1995,
Thank you.
related to your water quality work.